This is the WealthAbility Show with Tom Wheelwright. Way more money, way less taxes.
Welcome to the WealthAbility Show, where we're always discovering how to make way more money and pay way less tax. Hi, this is Tom Wheelwright, your host, founder, and CEO of WealthAbility. So the hardest part of entrepreneurship is relationships. And today we're going to discover how to build productive relationships and how to avoid the bad ones or the toxic ones. And we have a very special guest, Eric Barker, who wrote the book, Plays Well with Others, the surprising science behind why everything you know about relationships is mostly wrong. Eric, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
So Eric, if you can, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you decided to write about this. I know you've had other bestsellers, but why this one?
My first book was all about the science of success and looking at the maxims we grew up with around, success, whether they're true or not. Look at the science to stress test them. And Freud basically said the two parts of life are like work and love, or like work and relationship. So figured the second book I should stress test the maxims we knew about relationships. And for me, it was crazy because I've never been very good with relationships, and I ended up writing this during the pandemic, so it ended up being something that probably everybody needs right now.
It is. So, this is a time, I think this has probably been the most difficult time in history to build relationships. We've got technology that should help relationships, but seems to hinder relationships.
Exactly.
We have, a lot going on in the world that, historic relationships are on the fritz. Even between countries. So how do we protect relationships? How do we build relationships? How do we protect relationships? Let's just get right into it.
No, it's really fascinating what I've found, because it's really crazy, especially something we all dealt with a little bit, to some degree or another, or the pandemic, was loneliness. And what was really astounding was just basically loneliness is correlated with every negative health metric you can imagine. Mm-hmm. Like it's terrible. But the crazy thing was, John Cacioppo, who did most of the key research, found that people who are lonely don't spend any less time with people than non-lonely people do, which sounds crazy. It sounds staggering. But what he found out is that loneliness isn't about just being proximate to people. You could be in Times Square on New Year's Eve and still feel you're not connected to people. It's not about being proximate to people. It's how you feel about your relationships. So it's really critical for us to kind of get out there and not only like have contacts or coworkers, but to try and deepen those relationships and get closer to people, not just to be physically near them.
All right. So let's get into that. So how do you do that? How do you, just from a practical standpoint, especially if, these aren't people you're talking to every single day, how do you maintain those relationships? How do you make those relationships stronger?
Yeah. So the first thing I did here was I looked at Dale Carnegie, because that's the book we're all familiar with. But that book's almost a century old, and it was done before the advent of most social science research. It's all anecdotal. Truth is, when you're first meeting somebody, Dale Carnegie's book actually holds up pretty well according to the science. Almost every one of the key pillars he mentioned holds up. Is pretty effective. The only thing about Carnegie is that's about the initial meeting. That's about like just getting to know someone. It's not about deepening that and feeling a little bit deeper. For that, I found there were two critical factors, and that was time and vulnerability. Time is a really powerful signal, because you only get 24 hours in a day. If you're spending an hour with someone every single day, that's a clear sign of commitment. It's a clear sign you care about this person. And a Notre Dame study of 8 million phone calls showed that if people touch base every 2 weeks, that's what tends to maintain relationships over the long haul. The second thing was vulnerability. And that's just opening up, because when we show someone, we tell them something that could make us look bad, could make us look silly, that's a powerful signal that we trust them. It's not merely saying, I trust you. It's, damn it, here's a weapon that you could use against me. I trust you. And people are more likely to reciprocate. So time and vulnerability are the two key things for deepening friendships.
So that's interesting. One of the things we do when we bring in a new employee is we have them tell us one thing they don't want us to know. So we literally, we force them into the vulnerability.
I mean, it's really powerful, and it's good for us too, because we need to open up. Robert Garfield at University of Pennsylvania found that not being vulnerable it prolongs minor illnesses. It's correlated with a first heart attack, and it increases the chances that heart attack will be lethal. We need to open up.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that. So a lot of us, you know, I'm a CPA, so
Yeah.
CPAs aren't exactly known for opening up. How do people get past that fear of vulnerability, that fear of being transparent?
What I call it in the book is I call it the scary rule, which is basically, if it scares you, say it. Now, be incremental. You don't have to confess to any murders, you know, the first time you meet someone. But the point is, if you're hesitant, it's like I said, is it hesitant like, oh, this is a big deal? But if it's smaller, you know, go for it. And then wait. If the person reciprocates, go a little bit further. You know, this is Daniel Hrushka did a lot of the research on friendships, and he found this kind of back and forth, this reciprocation is how you progressively deepen it. You know, so if you're concerned about something work-wise, you don't want to look incompetent, you could talk about other areas of your life. You know, you can say, hey, I'm taking these tennis lessons, and man, I am horrible at it. And that can progress to, you know, hey, you know, it's like, you know, my kids are in their teens. It's getting challenging now. And then you can start to, if the person reciprocates, mention, yeah, this area of work is difficult. Because the thing is, a lot of us feel like we're not getting supported in our relationships. But if you don't tell people your weaknesses, the problems you're having, they can't help you.
Yeah, it's a good point. Now, let's go back to the first thing, which is every 2 weeks. So you talked about a phone call every 2 weeks. Can you talk about the difference between a phone call, a Zoom call, and in person?
Yeah,
as far as developing the relationship.
Basically, you know, you want to get face-to-face as much as you can. There is a difference. There was a study they did a study of like online cancer support groups versus in-person support groups. And in-person support groups, the depression rate was 0. In the online groups, depression rate was over 90%. There's something about the emotional connection between that. But hey, technology is better than nothing. The issue around technology, what's really critical, because you hear a lot of back and forth, social media is bad, social media is okay. In the end, social media is great if we're leveraging it to actually get together face-to-face, or if there's no other way to talk to that person. But the critical thing is we don't want it cannibalizing. You know, we don't want to have that. You get that social time, you get that budget, you're 24 hours every day, and you don't want social media and technology taking over where face-to-face used to be. That can cause problems.
So let's take this into the workplace, since we're talking to entrepreneurs here.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about this whole get back to work, right? Do we go in the office? Do we not go in the office, et cetera, et cetera? And like we did a survey, and over half of our employees say, I don't want to come into the office. Yeah. And I'm going, okay. At the same time, you're missing a lot of the benefit of being in a business organization. So, so what's the balance there? How often do people need to get into the office? Because clearly, if you're going to maintain relationships, you do at least have to do that once in a while. But how often is enough?
I mean, you know, I don't have strict numbers in terms of it, but the truth is there's a lot to support what you're saying, where basically, you know, so much in critical. In my first book, when I was talking about success, it's like networking is really critical. And so much of networking, at least in terms of the office, you know, with the office, it's very passive. You know what I mean? You're in meetings with people. You're bumping into them in the hall. You're seeing them in the elevator. That just stops. All of a sudden, all of your upkeep of relationships has to be very deliberate. That's really hard. You can do it, but it's really hard, and it's not going to be as high bandwidth as seeing somebody face to face. You want to do your best to maintain that, but it's really difficult. Like I said, those accidental meetings, those accidental moments, that chance to talk with the senior VP who decides whether you get that promotion or not, or that, you know, potential client or something else, it gets hard to schedule. So it's good to get as much face-to-face time as you can, you know, while thinking about the pandemic and everything else.
Interesting. So if you were talking to employees and you were advising employees, you'd say, get into the office.
I mean, for employees, you absolutely want to be doing that. And in fact, again, taking health and safety into consideration, you could look at this as kind of like a really powerful time right now, because if nobody else wants to get into the office,
Right.
if nobody else is going to be in the office, that's a very strong leverage point for somebody who wants to get in the office and will have face-to-face time with a lot of other people that they wouldn't.
This is a fascinating topic. We've been,
Mhm.
I've been actually talked to several people about design of the office, design of, how do you bring people back in the office? How often do you bring them back in the office?
Yeah.
And what it seems like is the owners always want to bring people back in the office.
Yeah.
The employees don't always want to come back in the office.
Yeah.
My view is if all you care about, if you just want to be a piece of equipment, don't come in the office. But
Yeah.
if you want to be part of the team and part of the organization and an integral part, then you need to be in the office. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at Jeffrey Pfeffer's research at Stanford, he found amazingly, it's like for you to do well, for you to get promoted, your boss needs to like you. And this isn't like, basically he found that if your boss likes you, performance doesn't matter as much. And if your boss doesn't like you, it's like performance, performance isn't going to save you.
Doesn't matter at all, right?
Yeah. So that critical aspect of getting that face time, being there, but also, like I said, it's a really high leverage point right now. If nobody else is coming back in, it's clear your boss wants people back in, and you're the only one who's doing it. That sends, again, a pretty powerful signal that you are a loyal, dutiful employee.
No, that's a good point. Now, you mentioned earlier that optimally at least every 2 weeks you're contacting somebody to maintain a relationship.
Yeah.
How many people can you contact every 2 weeks? I look at, for example, as we were talking earlier, I just launched a new book, right?
Yeah.
And in launching the new book, I made contacts with people that I hadn't talked to for sometimes 1 or 2 years. Yeah. And I felt like, I need to make contact more often with these people. Yeah. How do you decide, okay, I can only contact so many people. I can only have that real relationship with so many people. How do you decide which are those people?
Well, I mean, this is where we're getting the distinction between like personal relationships and work relationships. For work relationships, you can be a little bit more strategic about it. Where it's like, what are the high leverage relationships? If you're trying to promote a book or something like that, then you're going to be thinking about who's really going to be able to move the needle in terms of sales, exposure, et cetera. With personal relationships, who do you care about the most? You want to prioritize those. So to some degree, you want to be thinking about ranking, because there is what's called Dunbar's number. This is Robert Dunbar, who basically did research at Oxford that shows we can only maintain close relationships with so many people. At every level, there's kind of a threshold at how many people we can feel close to. And one slot doesn't open until somebody moves out. And this is consistent with all the literature, because basically the research shows after 7 years, half of close friends aren't close friends anymore. There's this dance of who's close and who's not. So for personal relationships, think about who's closest to you. For business relationships, you do need to think about who's going to be most helpful in terms of your career and prioritize those. Because you're right, we can't stay in touch with everybody every 2 weeks. 2 weeks was just the pattern that Notre Dame found in the study of which relationships persisted. And what they found was the ones that stayed in touch every 2 weeks were the ones that 2 years later were still going.
Got it. So not all relationships are good relationships. So how do you judge, when you meet somebody, or when you're trying to decide, do I want to develop this relationship? How do you make that kind of decision? I know you talk about that. So how do you go about that process?
So what you really want to be looking for there, because the truth is we are pretty terrible. We're pretty good at sizing people up when we first meet them. It generally like the 70% level, but in terms of reading what's on somebody's mind, body language, we're pretty terrible at that. That's what the literature shows consistently. So what you really need to do is, it's how do people reciprocate? So if you're making an effort to make that time and they're not a great sign. That's kind of a litmus test. If you're opening up and being vulnerable and they're not, again, litmus test. And then when you're talking about, dealing with really difficult, potentially toxic people, like people who are narcissistic, those are the times when we also really need to kind of test in that way, where we want to when we talk with them, we want to try and develop their empathy muscles because they're probably not that strong. So we want to emphasize community, vulnerability, similarity, those three. And if the person warms up a little bit, great, there's an opportunity here. If they don't, again, they don't respond to, community, vulnerability, and similarity, it's probably not going to be there. It's probably they're failing the litmus test. This is probably one you want to deprioritize.
So in your research, have you found or looked at what the consequences are to staying in that negative or toxic relationship?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. What's really interesting, Juliette Holt-Lunstad did this research that, you might think that enemies are the most difficult relationship, that's what causes us the most stress, is people, we don't like them, they don't like us. It's actually not the case. The people who cause us the most stress are those frenemies, those people in the middle, those people who this time they're nice, next time they're awful. Because that unpredictability, that lack of control drives our brains crazy. We never know what's coming next. Enemies, you try and stay away from them. You just try and minimize it. That's easy. Frenemies are hard, and the research shows that those ambivalent relationships make up 50% of our relationships, and we don't see those people any less than we see real friends. And part of this is due to the office. You're going to have to deal with people you don't necessarily want to deal with for certain projects, or entrepreneurs, certain vendors, certain clients. So again, that issue of emphasizing similarity, vulnerability, community to try and get that litmus test. Can I get this person to open up a little bit? Can I see if this person has some goodness inside them? And that's a really difficult challenge. If you can, if they're not responsive, they stay difficult, they're not responding to those things, it's best if you can to just minimize contact, to the degree you can. It's the easiest way, and most people don't try to do it because they feel guilty. However, business relationships, you may not have a choice. And if you don't have a choice and this person is going to stay cold, distant, difficult, then you want to focus on making it a more transactional relationship. That way you don't get taken advantage of. That way it doesn't drive you crazy. That way you're not wasting your effort.
Got it. Like my wife would say, don't pretend they're a friend if they're not a friend.
I mean, if they're not going to act like a friend, it's like, focus on the transaction, focus on the business, do what you have to do, because otherwise you're probably going to get hurt. You're going to get taken advantage of. It's not worth it.
Got it. So when you talk about business relationships and whether they're office relationships, like you say, vendors, clients, whatever, what would be the top three things that you would advise people to either look for in the relationship, to deal with in the relationship, to do about the relationship?
I mean, I would go back to those key things of like time, vulnerability, and looking for reciprocation. Because the key thing here is once you get past the Dale Carnegie, hi, how are you? Oh, your shirt looks nice. You want to get to that level of like, can I develop something more akin to a friendship where we can trust one another? And the key element there is those costly signals. Time, vulnerability are costly signals. Giving you my time, that cost me something. It's opportunity cost. I can't get that time back. Vulnerability, I'm telling you things that might make you look bad. So if I put that out there and the person reciprocates, great, meet them and try and push a little bit further. If they're not reciprocating, then it's like, again, you want to shift to something more transactional because it's not worth it. So that's immediately, you want to get the friendliness. The really key thing that Carnegie reveals is that issue of building similarity is really powerful, but past that, push for time and vulnerability. If you're not feeling it back, okay, then, downvote that a little bit. And if they are, reciprocate and try and deepen that to where you're spending more time, you're getting to know each other better, and you're sending those costly signals that, hey, I'm investing here, maybe you should too.
I like it. It sounds like that's a good way to kind of narrow that field. Yeah. You've only got so much time,
exactly,
and so much capacity, and some of it, some people are more introverted, some people are more extroverted. So some people have more capacity for that than there was in the first place. Then that seems like a really good way. Those are really good approaches to narrowing the field.
Well, another thing I would say is in terms of, networking for both employees and entrepreneurs, again, you have that time issue. What's really critical in terms of making new connections, new networking, is there's research on what's called super connectors. And that is, if you look at your contact list, like on your smartphone or whatever, you'll realize that a disproportionate number of the people you know were introduced to you by a very small number of people. There's this one person who's connected me with so many friends, so many vendors, so many clients. So if I'm going to network, I want to start with those super connectors. I want to start with those kind of hubs, at the middle of those, where are connected the most nodes in the network. That's where you want to do like 80-20 Pareto. That's where I want to spend a disproportionate amount of my time, is reconnecting with those super connectors and asking them, hey, is there somebody I should talk to? Hey, do you know anybody who might be good in this arena? If you only have so much time, that's the best place to start and to put a disproportionate amount of your resources.
I love it. Super practical advice, Eric. Thanks so much. Eric Barker. The book is Plays Well with Others, The Surprising Science Behind Why Everything You know about relationships is mostly wrong. Any final words?
No, it's great. I really hope that everybody can check the book out and use it to improve both their business and their personal relationships, because it's been a tough time for all of us.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I know for sure is that, when we do improve those relationships, and I love the super connector idea, because when we get there, my experience is when you have those deeper, the better relationships, you're always going to make way more money and pay way less tax. Well,
absolutely.
Thanks so much. We'll see y'all next time.
You've been listening to the WealthAbility Show with Tom Wheelwright. Way more money, way less taxes. To learn more, go to wealthability.com.